which we rate, rank, and review any artist's discography, songs, musical topics, really whatever comes to mind. This episode, doing a little bit of a love letter to the man above me, Rich Latta, who has appeared on many of these episodes. I wanted to pay back to him by covering one of his personal favorite artists, one that I know that he is indelibly passionate towards. It's going to be the 80s post-punk, sort of by the end of it, alternative rock, sort of almost all poppy sounds of Siouxsie and the Banshees, a band that I was really only familiar with because of Taste Like Music covering them last year. And I tried to get into them. I listened to Juju, I listened to Tinderbox, and I tried to listen to Kaleidoscope, and I just wasn't connecting with it then. I went back a little bit recently and I heard Peepshow, and I thought that was pretty solid. And that sort of got them on my radar to want to check out. And I just asked Rich one day if, because I was happy that he'd been joining me so much, if he wanted to do an artist that was more akin to his styles. And Siouxsie seemed like a perfect choice. 11 albums typically. We're counting 10 due to the exclusion of Through the Looking Glass, which is their covers album, which we'll bring up because I feel very strongly about that record. I know he does as well. That being said, your familiarity with Siouxsie and the Banshees.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on again. Siouxsie and the Banshees are one of my favorite bands. On some days, they're my very favorite band, like today. And I got my Siouxsie shirt on. And so I got into them when I was 16. I first heard them when a friend lent me his Walkman during lunch break at school so I could hear some of Tinderbox. And I was very intrigued. Um, Soon after that, I picked up my first Banshees album on LP, which was Once Upon a Time, the singles. And I was immediately converted. Before long, I had all their releases up to that point, and I continued to buy them as soon as they came out. Um, Siouxsie and the Banshees, I think, is one of the most creative bands ever. They are masters at creating an atmosphere and painting a picture with their lyrics, which are always perfectly complemented by the music. Um, they're known for exploring the darker side of life, but there's a lot more to them than that. Um, I never did see the Banshees, but I did see the Creatures in 1998 in a club in LA. For those who don't know, the Creatures are Siouxsie Sue's singer and drummer Budgie, sort of a side project during Siouxsie and the Banshees' reign, and then it kind of became their full-time thing for a while after they broke up. And that concert was such a blast. Um, I was really drunk and stoned at the time, and midway through the concert, I really had to pee, but I didn't want to take a pee break. I held it for the rest of the concert because I didn't want to miss anything. And I was just like 10 feet from Siouxsie, and she was dancing in front of me, and I was all caught up in the moment. And I just drunkenly yelled out something like, "Baby." And she looked at me kind of funny. And then after the song, Budgie comes down from his drum kit and gives her this big hug, kind of like to say, "She's mine." And they were married at the time. So, uh, anyway, that was a blast.
I bet.
So, are we ready to jump into the ranking?
Yep, I'm ready to get into it, but I feel before we start anything, there is one record that we are excluding due to just basic rules of my format, being Through the Looking Glass, which is a covers record. However, I think that it is a really strong covers record. I think that they're really able to morph the songs into their style perfectly. And it's really just, I don't want to say too much because, as I told you, it would place very highly on my list. So I want to keep it at, I feel like they were really great at interpreting the songs for that project, and it's a really unique batch of songs. So I really
Yes,
enjoyed
it
that
gets
one.
my vote for greatest covers album of all time.
Nice. Number two for me. Number two. That being said, feel free to kick us off with your bottom placement.
Okay, so we're doing 10 albums. My number 10 is Superstition from 1991, their ninth studio album, not counting the covers record. Um, this is their poppiest album, and some of the songs are downright happy as opposed to the gloom and darkness that we've typically gotten before. If they can be accused of selling out, it's with this album. I sort of felt that way about Superstition when it came out, even though I listened to it like crazy just because I'm a huge fan. But I felt like they abandoned their goth fan base. I found their production to be slick and gooey, overproduced with loaded with cheesy synths. Even though it came out in 91, I felt it was plagued by some of the worst plasticky elements of the 80s, which they ironically managed to avoid during the 80s. But I'm much more appreciative of the album today, especially now that I understand the lyrics better. And Siouxsie's voice sounds great on it. I think she's at the peak of her powers here. It starts off with an absolute banger. Kiss Them For Me is totally infectious. That snaky percussion sound is addictive, and the song has a cool East Indian thread running through it. Calvin Singh joins in on tabla. It's a tribute to Jane Mansfield, who made a film in 1957 with Cary Grant called Kiss Them For Me. And it was their only top 40 hit in the States. But the next song, Fear of the Unknown, is just awful dance drag, and Cry sounds like a second rate Berlin song, not what you'd expect from the Banshees. However, the foreboding Drifter brings in some of that classic Banshees darkness. And Little Sister is a lovely, easygoing song. I quite like that one. I used to hate Silly Thing. I thought they should have given it to Mariah Carey or somebody like that. Thought it was just awful. But I appreciate it a lot more now that I know what it's about. It's about a major fight that Siouxsie and bassist, songwriter, and co founder Steven Severin had, and how stupid it was. The song is quite light, but it actually has some wild guitar playing on it. I used to think Got to Get Up was a rather lackluster motivational piece, but now I think it's really good and I appreciate the message. Silver Waterfalls is glorious, very catchy. Softly is an ambient piece, complete with all the trappings, samples, and whatnot that you often get with that genre. And the closer, The Ghost in You, that one has a truly haunting keyboard sound, haunting keyboard line. For a long time, I disliked this album because it made me want to throw on the Scream or Kaleidoscope instead. Now that I'm older, I can accept it for what it is without trashing it for not being Tinderbox. I don't think they should be knocked for making happy music for a change. And if they were trying to get more airplay and make more money, that shouldn't be held against them either. So I'm at 3.5 stars.
Well, Rich, I gotta say, in my youth and my lack of wisdom, I agree wholeheartedly with younger you because my 10 is Superstition, and this record sucks. I do not like it at all. It was very much
Oh,
released in the early 90s, 1991, as you mentioned, but it reeks of late 80s pop cheese, almost sounding akin to like a Prince record. I just don't like it at all. It feels almost bland at points. The vocals to me feel incredibly phoned in, and the songs are just incredibly weak. The synth choices are awful across this record. As you pointed out, the keyboard line in The Ghost of You is maybe my least favorite part on the entire record. I hate it. It just irks me on so many levels. I think it does not fit. And I don't know. I just think it's a boring listen and it lacks what makes the group really stand out at their highest moments. I have this one at 2 stars. I think it's a pretty poor record overall. Sorry, Jason. This was one of your worst opinions. So everybody,
Yeah, that's right. That was his number one.
that was rough.
Um, so even Kiss Them for Me didn't do anything for you?
I did not like a moment of that record, my friend.
Oh, shit.
It
Okay.
was
Wow.
drab.
Okay. All right. Well, my number nine is going to piss off a certain kind of Siouxsie fan, but I've got Join Hands from 1979, their second album. Um, Join Hands continues in the same vein as their remarkable debut, but it's even darker and murkier, even more claustrophobic. The album begins with the clang of a church bell before launching into the harsh, ominous Poppy Day with lyrics taken from the World War I poem In Flanders Field. Regal Zone is jarring and disconcerting, while the lyrics are disturbing. This is not an album you throw on at a party for a good time. This is challenging music. Um, the best song is Playground Twist, which was the only single from the album. I'm not entirely sure what it's about, but it seems to capture the horror of youth being picked on in the schoolyard. Very menacing. The penultimate track, Mother, is quite strange, with Siouxsie singing over a dying music box accompanied by some freaky sounds. I would say this is another strong album from the first incarnation of the band, except for the last track, The Lord's Prayer. The first time they performed this song or something like it was when the band first started. They formed on a whim when a slot opened up at the 100 Club Punk Festival back in 1976, in London, of course. Uh, the track was improvised live in the studio, and it shows. I find it unbearable, and to make matters worse, it goes on for 14 minutes. On and on it goes. It's just not very musical. And for me, this cost the album an entire point. So I've got it at 3.5 stars, merely good. Otherwise, it had the potential to be excellent.
Interesting. Yeah, I generally agree with most of what you said to Join Hands. However, I think all of it applies on their debut, which is my number 9, The Scream. I know that this is some people really like this one. Shout out Vanessa, her favorite. But yeah, I don't get it either. I just don't have a ton to say about it. It's bland, basic post punk with a very unrefined Susie Sue singing all across it. I think their cover of Helter Skelter is kind of horrible. And the rest of the album is just incredibly anonymous to me. It's fine, but I just simply don't have any reason to return to it. I'm at 2.5. I'm going to be at 2.5 for a little bit. So I'm sorry. I promise that I get decently high in scores later on, but a couple of these records I'm not too crazy about. So number 9, The Scream, 2.5 stars.
All right. Well, my number eight is The Scream. And again, a certain kind of fan that loves their first incarnation the best is not happy about that. But anyway, yeah, the debut from 1978. I think The Scream is a striking album, more or less the beginning of post punk, the seeds of goth. The music is dark, jagged, and angular, completely original. Nothing like this came before it. The guitars are very metallic, not like heavy metal music, but metallic in the way that, metal material actually sounds. The band sprang from the punk rock scene, and this is their punkiest album. It's harsh and raw. They immediately put their own nightmarish twist on punk, however. It's a landmark album that proved to be very influential. In particular, it made a big impression on a young Robert Smith. Pure opens the album with a really creepy instrumental featuring disturbing wails from Siouxsie before launching into the intense jigsaw feeling, which seems to be about a mental breakdown. Overground seems to be about suppressing your true nature in order to fit in with society, while Carcass is the punkiest track left over from their earliest days before guitarist John McKay and drummer Kenny Morris joined the band. Their cover of Helter Skelter, I think, kicks major ass. It's so full of energy and spunk, and I even prefer it to the original. That's how good I think it is. Then there's Mirage, probably my favorite track here. It's just mesmerizing, and it rocks out in its own way. It's a good example of the topsy-turvy, off-balance feeling on this album and Banshees music in general. The last track, Switch, is pretty trippy and goes through several changes, purportedly about a topic as mundane as changing one's field of employment. I prefer my interpretation that souls change bodies at night while we're sleeping. These songs are brimming with creativity, an intense claustrophobic record like none other. I know many Banshees fans would decry my low placement, but I do agree with him that this album is excellent. I give it 4.5 stars. Truly excellent, but they got even better.
Yeah, if you had any thoughts that we might be on a similar wavelength, I feel like that just kind of 4.5 already. Shit, what are we doing? Me talking about the National? Christ. Anyways, for me, number 8, you already talked about it, Join Hands. Funny, score is very different, but we talked about the same records, so funny how that works out. Everything I said about the Scream applies to this record, but I don't know. Generally speaking, the songs aren't very notable to me. They still haven't fully came together as a band, I feel like. I think that there's a couple of more interesting parts across here. They just never come together for a full song. And the almost music box sounding lead on Mother, Oh Main Papa were just really terrible to me. Overall, it's fine. And I do think that Siouxsie sounds a bit better, but she's yet to really find herself as a vocalist. I have it at 2.5 stars, and I actually didn't hate the closer. Like, mind you, it's not amazing or anything, but I think that they definitely have weaker, and I feel like I at least respect the artistic choice to do a song like that whenever they basically aren't even a good band at this point. I don't know. I respect the effort, but better luck next time, buds. You tried your best. Number 8, Join Hands, 2.5 stars.
All right, fair enough. My number 7, I've got The Rapture, their 10th and final studio album of those we're considering from 1995. The Rapture is quite an eclectic mix of songs. The album begins with probably the poppiest song they ever did, the light and bouncy Oh Baby. I used to hate this one, but I quite like it now. From there, I give all these songs 5 stars, except for Fall from Grace, which I don't care for too much. Um, so the first 4 tracks are more or less pop songs in the vein of Superstition, but then the album gets really good with Not Forgotten, which features pounding tribal drums from Budgie and a heavy, ominous sound, really sinister. Sick Child is a gorgeous song full of twinkling wonderment It really comes alive at the chorus. The Lonely One is a fun, easygoing track with a cool bass line and tasty slide guitar and weird intermittent vocals from some French dude. It's about preferring to be alone. Forever is just heavenly, like passing through time portals or something. It's very sad about losing the love of your life. Then you get the title track, which is an amazing song. At 11 and a half minutes, it's their second longest song behind the Lord's Prayer. It slowly evolves through various changes. The song experiments with rhythm created from different instruments like the violin. A real beauty, that one. Love Out Me, the last track, and the last song they ever put out on a studio album, is positively stunning. One of their heaviest songs. It's super intense. The singer is in emotional distress, fighting a war within herself. Incredible song. So the best songs here, most of them are on par with anything else in their catalog, I'd say. This is the Banshees at their best, but there's a few songs I like less, and the album as a whole is rather disjointed, beginning as a pop album in the mode of Superstition before transforming into delicious Banshees darkness. So I've got it at 4.5 stars.
Believe it or not, that's my number seven too, The Rapture. It's really funny. However, I'm still at 2.5. This album is a bit of a tale of two sides for me. I loathe the early pop half. It's taking everything that I disliked about Superstition and just repeating it. Despite that, however, I think Forever, as you mentioned, that's an excellent song. I actually really like the title track a ton. I think it's almost post rock at moments, and I love how it moves along. I don't know. Past that, it's fine. It's listenable. I'm still at 2.5 for it. I think it's okay. But those two songs are among the band's best, and I will be talking about them later. So, number seven, The Rapture, 2.5 stars.
All right. So my number 6 is Peepshow from 1988. Their eighth album among the ones we're counting. This album was kind of huge and it was a commercial success. Lead single Peekaboo was played in the clubs and reached number one on the Billboard Alternative Songs chart. Pretty cool. They become a quintet for this album with the addition of multi instrumentalist Martin McCarrick, and they bring in new guitarist John Klein. And these musicians added new colors to the Banshee sound. The opening track, Peekaboo, is such a banger. It's got a wild hip hop beat with backwards percussion and intermittent droning bass sounds and horns. McCarrick's accordion adds sort of a playfully sinister touch to the proceedings. The vocals are so cool, the way they bounce all over the place from speaker to speaker. The first track is so good that I think the following track, The Killing Jar, suffers a bit having to follow it. It's still a great song, but I think the supremely creepy third track, Scarecrow, would have sounded better. The Swirling Carousel is one of my favorites, just brilliant songwriting, full of childhood wonderment. Burn Up is a very different song for them, sporting a train beat and a country musical flair. It's one of those songs that speeds up as it goes on, and they do these kinds of songs so well, just scorching. Rawhead and Bloody Bones is super creepy, very tiny sounding. Love that track. And then we get The Last Beat of My Heart, which is so majestic, a really different kind of song for Siouxsie. A straightforward love song, but a completely unique one. Finally, Rhapsody is an intense, dramatic closer. This is a poppier album for Siouxsie in some ways, and some people were already accusing the Banshees of selling out. But there's still plenty of delicious Banshees darkness to be found here. The playing is as good as ever, and I'm up to 5 stars.
Well, I guess you kind of like this group. That's cool. Yeah, I knew this was where we were going to diverge, because I know this record is more than likely going to be very high on your list. Number 6, I have Kaleidoscope. I think this is a pretty big step up from the first two records, however. Still can't call it a good album, though. I'm at 3 stars for Kaleidoscope. My last 3 stars. So everything above 3.5 or higher. So go me. The big things that elevate this record are the production as well as Siouxsie's vocals. The sound of this record feels a lot more fully formed. It's a lot more complete in comparison to the other records. And she's really starting to grow an identity that I feel like she would formulate across Kiss in the Dreamhouse and Juju. Happy House is a pretty great opener, and I thought Hybrid was a really cool song. Desert Kisses is another strong one. The only real issue here is that I don't think that the album's very consistent. Tenet and Trophy are just okay to me. Clockface and Red Lights just aren't good. And the last two songs overall I find fairly mediocre. But I think there's plenty of highlights within the playing, and I do think that there are some decent songs that I mentioned earlier. On the whole, I just don't think it's incredibly remarkable. And I have it at 3 stars. I think that's a decent record, but I do think that they will get better from here. And this is definitely transitionary from them not being good to them being good. So, number 6, Kaleidoscope.
Okay, if you say so. So now the top five. My top five are virtually interchangeable. They're all just so supremely excellent. They're like tipping the scales. It's kind of hard to evaluate them. They're so good. Um, and by the way, every 80s Banshees album I've got at 5 stars. It's just the ones in the 70s and the 90s that it gets a little lower. But so my number 5 is A Kiss in the Dreamhouse from 1982, their fifth album. This album is sort of a return to the eclectic experimentalism of their Kaleidoscope album, but it's still quite different with its own feel. They largely break free of the post-punk goth thing they were doing on previous albums, although the dark subject matter has not completely gone away. They expand their sound with orchestral instruments, and they made a deliberate move away from synths. Cascade is a fantastic opener about an LSD trip Siouxsie had. Trippy lyrics, very dramatic alt rock, killer bass line from Severin. I love Green Fingers, such a magical song. And I love the recorder, the woodwind instrument. It adds a nice touch and adds a little bit of color to the song. Obsession is slow and sensuous, very breathy, and there's orchestral bells that really contribute to the atmosphere. Circle is sort of a portrait of madness with a loop that goes over and over throughout the song, thus the title. Melt is one of their very best songs with flamenco guitars, very dramatic. I'm not exactly sure what it's about, but it seems to compare sex with death. Incredible song. Painted Bird is a powerful rocker, while Cocoon is a cool jazzy number. The album ends with Slow Dive, another great rocker with some great violin. So this is a fun album, quite a bit lighter in nature than their previous work, although there's still plenty of Banshees darkness in there as well. Absolutely brilliant. Uh, don't need to say it, but 5 stars.
Well, a little bit lower on it than you. That's my number 5, A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. This is crazy. This never happens. We're typically
Yeah.
all over the damn place. While I do enjoy this album, I think it is a pretty significant step down from the prior record. The songs just simply aren't as strong, in my opinion. And there's some weirder moments, a bit almost carnivale, especially at the end of something like She's a Carnival. Past that, though, I thought like Obsession, Circle, and Melt are they're all right. They're good. Oh, but I mean, I'm just not in love with them. In some ways, it feels like Juju again, just with less defined hooks to me. My favorites here were Cascade, which I think is one of their all-time best songs. Rain Fingers is really strong, and I also like Painted Blue a lot. I like this album. I think it's good overall. However, I just simply don't think that it's at the highs that they would reach after this and the highs that they reached just before it. So I have it at 3.5 stars. Number 5 for A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. 5 good albums. Good job, Siouxsie, and like the 18 Johns that were in this band.
All right. I'll take it. So number 4, I've got Hyena from 1984, their 6th album. Hyena is an alt rock classic in my book, and I think they really hit on their classic, most fully realized sound with this one and their next album. Everything comes together fantastically. Hyena is notable for being the only studio album they recorded with Robert Smith. He stepped in for John McGeoch, who was having personal problems at the time. It's a very colorful album, and they continue more or less in the same experimental vein as their previous album, A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. There's plenty of the classic Banshees darkness to be found here, though it's not nearly as dark as Juju. The opening track, Dazzle, is an amazing song, beginning with strings playing an exquisite, moving melody before exploding into view, the speakers filling up with instruments and droning, pulsing bass in the background. People have criticized the production on this album, but I love that thick din of sound. I love the spare sounding Take Me Back with its wandering organ and shuffling beat. The cover of Dear Prudence, which appears on the American version of the album, I think it's just fantastic. Really fills out the sparse original with the full band. Just magical. Running Town is so good it could be a Beatles song in its own right. And Blow the House Down is an intense closer, really psychedelic, a swirling dervish frenzy. It's hard to identify what instruments they're using, but it sounds incredible. Uh, no weak tracks, another supremely great album. Hyena.
That's my number 4 too, Hyena. What is going on?
Jeez.
It's crazy.
We've never done this.
Yeah, I'm used to being utterly baffled and in awe of the lists. And right now, this is interesting. This is the record that they worked with Robert Smith on, and you can really tell definitely touches of like pornography at the top across this album. It has that early post punk sound with a little bit of weirder, a bit more pop driven elements that you would get on an excellent Cure record. Sadly, Robert Smith is nowhere near as good a player as the guy that was here prior. Do I know his name? No. Should I have looked that up? Yes. And it's just another inconsistent batch of songs for me. The highs on this do exceed Dreamhouse, however. The opener Dazzle is incredible, as you mentioned before. We Hunger is also very strong. I like Swimming Horses as well as Playing Bone. I bet 3.5 stars. This is an album that I do enjoy. I just think, like plenty of their other records, it's pretty notably flawed in my opinion. So number 4, I have Hyena, 3.5 stars.
Okay, better. All right, so my number 3 is Kaleidoscope from 1980, their 3rd album. Kaleidoscope is an appropriate title for this one as the band expanded their sound with a wide variety of textures including synth and drum machines. Siouxsie and bassist Steven Severin had a nasty falling out with original guitarist John McKay and drummer Kenny Morris at a record store signing event the day Join Hands was released. McKay and Morris subsequently abandoned the band on the eve of their tour. Sue and Severin were left scrambling to find replacements. Thankfully, Robert Smith, who was opening their shows with his own band, The Cure, stepped in to temporarily fill the guitar slot for the first time. And they found phenomenal drummer Budgie at this point, who stayed with the band for the rest of the way till they broke up in 1996. On the album, guitar wizard John McGeoch stepped in, and also Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols played on a few tracks. John would go on to become a permanent member of the band and stay for the next couple of albums. Kaleidoscope begins with one of their greatest songs, Happy House, which seems to be about how even nonconformists have their own little cliques in which members are expected to conform. It's also about putting on happy appearances when behind the scenes the reality is grim. I love the eerie guitar and bass that kicks off the song before it takes off. Love that off-kilter drum beat. Budgie is such a fantastic drummer. He tends to be a very busy drummer, working his entire kit with polyrhythms and tribal beats. Really creative guy. Tennant takes the everyday reality of having neighbors and turns it into a creepy prospect, a very spare song with freaky effects. Most of these songs are excellent 5-star songs. Hybrid is my least favorite. That one drags a bit. Still very good though. But Christine is a great subversive little pop song about Christine Sizemore, who reportedly had 22 separate personalities. Red Light has a cool, really freaky sound, Budgie playing along with a drum machine and with the repeated figure of a droning bass synth and sounds from a camera. The expensive professional kind, that makes clicking noises. The last track, Skin, is super freaky, apparently about a woman who makes clothes out of human skin. I love Budgie's busy drum beat and the Hitchcockian guitars. The addition of Budgie and John McGeoch really upped the Banshees' game, and they delivered one of their best albums with Kaleidoscope. So many excellent songs here. Of course, 5 stars.
Rich, what if I told you that my number 3 was Peepshow? So we have the same top 2. Will they be in the same order? Probably not. My opinion here is fairly similar to Hyena. It's a bit more poppy for them anyways. Siouxsie by this point in the career is a great performer. I still think that it's a flawed record, notably because of the opener Peekaboo, which I do not like at all. No, it's fine. I don't know. There are still some of the weird carnival-esque moments that I just don't like throughout it. Notably on Carousel and Rawhead and Bloody Bones. Past that, however, I do think that there are some great songs on here, notably some of my favorites within the career. The Killing Jar, Scarecrow, and my absolute favorite being the closer Rhapsody. Still at 3.5. I think that this is a good album. I actually had this one at 4 before doing this, but it dropped a little bit. It's closer to 4 than Hyena, though. It's a pretty good album overall. It's got some strong moments. However, I do think that there's just some inconsistencies that knock it down for me, which is a shame. So number 3, Peepshow.
Damn, that is a shame. Oh well. Okay, we're at number 2, and I've got Juju from 1981, their 4th album. This is their darkest, most gothic record. is considered one of the greatest goth records of all time, if not the greatest. All of these songs are excellent. The opening track, Spellbound, is one of their best singles, opening with a picky electric guitar part before moving into a furiously strummed acoustic. The song was famously singled out for praise by guitarist Johnny Marr of the Smiths, who was greatly influenced by the Banshees and John McGeoch in particular. I love the part where Siouxsie sings, "Take him by the legs and throw him down the stairs." And then Budgie simulates someone tumbling down a staircase with his drums. Into the Light is another brilliant one with jagged dynamics and sounds that make me think of a witch casting spells. Arabian Nights is an amazing single, sort of a protest against brutality towards women in the Middle East. Monitor is fantastic, sounding like a cross between industrial alt rock and disco. Really trippy guitar sounds and vocal effects. Night Shift is one of the creepiest songs ever. Purportedly about a serial killer, the Yorkshire Ripper. It makes me think of human sacrifices and demonic rituals. The final track, Voodoo Dolly, is really disturbing with guitar effects and feedback that tingle the spine. They are so good at tracks that speed up, like I've said before, and Voodoo Dolly is a good example of that. An absolutely amazing album. Of course, 5 stars.
Yeah, just missed at the end of the fourth quarter. Number 2 for me is Tinderbox. I knew it was coming. It is what it is. It's alarming how similar our rankings are. This is a once in a lifetime scenario here. Anyways, this is a step up from this is a step up from Hyena for me. But I do still have some of the issues like on Tinderbox. However, I love the sound of this album. Probably my favorite production that they ever had. And Siouxsie is really the front woman that she'd been working towards all throughout the career across here. The lineup is excellent, and the tunes themselves are all incredibly well performed and crafted. My primary issues just come down to how much I personally like them. I like all of the songs across this record. I think that they're incredibly well performed and well created. But like none of them are my favorite Siouxsie and the Banshee songs, if that makes sense. The closest one is probably 92 Degrees, but even then, that doesn't quite make it. I thought Candyman is also really good. Same with this Unrest. But none of them made my top 10, which is probably the main reason. I don't know. I'm at 4 stars. I do think that this is a really good album. However, it's just, I wish the songs were ever so slightly tighter. Like if I could take my favorites from like Tinderbox, Hyeena, and Kiss in the Dreamhouse, there might be like a 5 star album there. As it stands, though, number 2 is going to be Tinderbox. 4 stars, a very good album.
Okay, I'll take 4 stars from you. I like it. All right. Well, yeah, my number one, that leaves Tinderbox from 1986, their seventh album. Just a phenomenal album. I think it's their heaviest, most rocking one. It is so rich and colorful, expertly produced. I read that it was a real struggle to put it together, but their hard work paid off in spades. They were having trouble getting sounds out of the new guitarist, John Valentine Carruthers, but it was so worth the effort because what he plays here is so fantastic. I've got every track at 5 stars. The production sounds incredible. Opener Candyman is ferocious. I love the slicing guitars, again, sounding like spells being cast. Severin's bass sounds badass. Sweetest Chill is exquisite, and I love the way it segs into the disturbing This Unrest, which in turn segs into Cities and Dust, one of their best singles. I do love what Jason of Taste Like Music said about Cities and Dust, and I'll go ahead and quote him because he's a little more articulate than me. He says, I think it's incredible. It's massive sounding, it's haunting and hooky and dancing, and it's dark all at once. Such a cool song. He said it was one of his favorite tracks of the 80s, and I'm right there with him. I absolutely adore Party's Fall. It's about getting old, but it has an uplifting section near the end. Budgie's drumming is phenomenal here, as it is on the whole album. His parts are complicated, but they never overwhelm the songs. His drumming is, of course, fantastic on the mysterious and ominous sounding final track, Land's End. The lyrics on this album are as sophisticated and poetic as ever. Siouxsie is in supremely fine voice. The band is at a peak, and it all comes together to make what is, in my opinion, at least for today, their best album.
Yeah, it's really good. However, my winner is a bit of a runaway. However, I feel like I need to make note because if it were included, I'd be talking about Through the Looking Glass now at my number two. That's actually my second favorite record by them in general. I think it really remedies the issue of consistency because they aren't writing the songs. No. Subtle jab aside, to my number one, pretty easily for me is going to be Juju. As I said earlier, this is a runaway. This album might be one of the biggest leaps in quality between releases for me. I have Kaleidoscope at 3 stars. I have this one at 4.5, and it's one of my favorite post-punk albums in general. I think this album is outstanding. I'm not sure what happened, but the band just really find their identity here. It's gothic, it's dark, but it's filled with incredible post-punk rhythms. Siouxsie is commanding all of these songs and tracks like you'd want, really becoming the goth queen that you'd know her for. And the drumming by Budgie here is just absolutely spectacular. I love his militant style across a track like Spellbound. It's really what elevates this record tenfold. But aside from that, the songs are just great. Spellbound is an incredible opener. You know, songs like Into the Light, Arabian Nights, and Halloween following, which might even be better. I mean, I won't act like the first half of this record isn't better, but the back half still has plenty to appreciate. My favorite of which being the closer, Voodoo Dolly, which, as you mentioned, it utilizes its 7-minute runtime brilliantly. I don't know. I just think that this record is far and away my favorite by them. I have it at 4.5. I think that it's a really great record across the board. And if I'm going to sit down and listen to Siouxsie and the Banshees, for me, I like plenty of these other records, but it's the only one that I can really say grips me enough to want to return to. Despite me really enjoying Tinderbox and me finding plenty to enjoy in something like Hyena or Peepshow. So number one for me, pretty easily going to be Juju, 4.5 stars.
All right, very cool. And I will say about Through the Looking Glass, I think one of the things that makes it such a great covers album is the way they reimagine these songs that they're covering. You know, they do their own thing with it. Like Sea Breezes by Roxy Music and Little Johnny Jewel by Television are more sort of weird, um, art rock pieces. And they kind of tighten them up and turn them into nifty little pop songs, completely reimagining them. And I think that's the hallmark of a great cover, not just a straight copy, but a reimagining. And they do it so well.
I would fully agree with that. I feel like just across the board, it's crazy what they're able to do with that songs. And I really commend just the difference in the tracks that they're pulling from. Like they have Sparks, they have Brian Eno, they have Roxy Music, they have Television, Iggy Pop. They're really pulling from entirely different spectrums of like pop and art rock and really creating what for me might honestly be their most artistic statement out there with how they're reimagining everything and really finding a way to morph it into their own identity. It's really excellent what they're able to do.
Absolutely.
That being said, songs. Uh,
All right, so we're doing top 10 songs. I didn't take any notes for these, so I'm just gonna list them off. My number 10, I've got Conga Congra, which is the B-side of Arabian Nights. Number 9, I've got another B-side, the B-side of Happy House, Drop Dead Celebration. Number 8 is Dazzle from Hyena. Number 7 is Lands In from Tinderbox. Number 6 is Night Shift from Juju. Number 5 is Happy House from Kaleidoscope. Number 4 is Arabian Nights from Juju. Number 3 is Cities and Dust from Tinderbox. Number 2 is Melt from A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. And my number 1 is Love Out Me from The Rapture.
well, we shared one. We shared in the same spot too, so that's interesting. The track that just missed my list, my number 11, is going to be Halloween, but top 10 now. Number 10, I have Forever from The Rapture. At number 9, I have The Rapture's title track. Then at number 8, the one that we agree on, I have Dazzle from Hyena. At number 7, I have The Passenger from Through the Looking Glass. Incredible Iggy Pop cover. Number 6, I have Scarecrow from Peepshow. At number 5, I have Cascades from Kiss in the Dreamhouse. At number 4, I have Rhapsody from Peepshow. At number 3, definitely the track that I did not see being this high at first, but I grew to love it. It's going to be Your Lost Little Girl from Through the Looking Glass, my favorite one of their covers. In my top 2, I have the big 2 tracks from Juju. I have Spellbound at number 2. And my favorite Siouxsie and the Banshees song is going to be Into the Light.
All right, cool. I think that's Jason's favorite song too,
Well, I got something, right?
if I remember correctly.
I'll look at that whenever we're done. That being said, though, that was Siouxsie and the Banshees. I will apologize for me really only caring about one album. I know that you love this group. I found plenty to enjoy. It's just, I feel like they struggled, at least for me, to consistently put out highbrow material. However, as you've obviously showcased, you feel very differently with your, what, 8 5-star albums at 7. You like this band a little bit.
Yeah, 7, I think. Yeah.
They're pretty into this group. So they got 1 or 2.
Six.
Interesting. You give more 5-star albums to Siouxsie and the Banshees than I do for any individual artist. So hold that with honor. I mean, hey, you love this band, as you said earlier. Pretty much your favorite artist. So who's that up there with? The Beatles, The Cure. Definitely. Curious.
Yeah. They're fantastic.
Yeah. I will say this, I love Siouxsie as a front woman, and I think Budgie's an incredible drummer. As well, once again, should have looked up his name. Whoever the guitarist is on Juju. That guy is killer. Love him.
John McGeoch.
Yeah. That guy did really good things on that album. That being said, any closing thoughts for Siouxsie, or you think that we got everything out for now?
I think we covered it.
Sounds good, my friend. With that being said, I really hope that you enjoyed everything. I hope that I was positive enough for half of this video. Siouxsie and the Banshee is definitely an interesting group. Regardless of how you look at them, definitely have an impact on post-punk, sort of the alt-rock landscape of the later 80s, and tons to enjoy throughout the catalog, even if it's not necessarily your scene. That being said, I really hope that you enjoy everything and give your opinions on this group down below. You have a great one. Bye.